Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. The title of today's show is Enough is Too Much. I wanted to start with a story from the Daily Mail, which is really quite revealing and should have got a lot more attention than it has. Iceland has tested 1/10 of its population for coronavirus at random and found that half of those who tested positive had the disease without realizing. They also discovered that 1,600 people have been infected with COVID-19 since the start of the outbreak. Of these cases, there were only 7 deaths, indicating a fatality rate of just 0.4%, which is significantly lower than other countries, including the UK. The findings were made during Iceland's rigorous testing campaign conducted with the help of Reykjavik-based biopharmaceutical company Decode Genetics, which has seen 10% of the 413 population swabbed, something yet to be achieved by any other nation. An estimated 50% of those infected with the virus, the company found, do not show any symptoms. Now, Iceland, of course, is a singular country. It's an island in the middle of the North Atlantic. And I reckon that the people of Iceland are rather fitter than those of most other Western countries. But we see 50%, 50% exposed. And I suspect that the figures in the rest of the Western world are just as high or higher. For the reason that the social distancing campaign started late, and of course it's been completely ineffective. For the reason that, we're all going to stay 6 feet or 2 meters away from each other, I guess, except, when we're walking down the street or we're going to the grocery store or wherever. And the experts have been telling us that no, the 2-meter rule is not sufficient because you need 24 to 27 feet. And by the way, the virus lives on metal surfaces for up to 9 days, and it hangs in the air for the longest time. Liquid AIDS. And yet, despite the fact that it is obvious that the rates, the terror rates that we have been shown are false, are obviously false, the Western world remains in a lockdown. There's simply no excuse for this. I wanted to read a story from Thursday by Christopher Ferreira, who writes for The Remnant, which I think is perhaps the best big picture study of the sanitary dictatorship, of the panic that I have seen. He begins by mentioning that his 96-year-old father, Joseph, has been in a nursing facility since March the 12th because the Wuhan virus is present and now has a fever of 102 degrees. My own father, who turned 89 years old, is in a long-term healthcare facility in Chilliwack, BC. Ferrer says, while my father may soon be benefiting from the use of hydroxychloroquine, moronic Democratic governors, cheered on by the same lying, evil media, have prohibited pharmacies and private doctors from dispensing this. The media have assisted these fools with the cover story that there is only a partial ban by Democrat governors because, to quote the Michigan directive, the aim is to prevent a shortage of patients with lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, or other ailments for which chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine are proven treatments. Yes, we can be sure that Governor Gretchen Witless Whitmer of Michigan is deeply concerned that lupus and arthritis sufferers and those with other ailments have an ample supply of the drug, as opposed to COVID-19 patients whose lives it might save. It couldn't possibly be the case that under no circumstances can she allow Trump to be proven right or the pandemic to be dismissed by a simple and effective treatment. He says that he's continuing the Remnant series on the coronavirus panic of 2020, writing from the perspective of someone who has an immediate relative in danger from the Wuhan virus. I will further present evidence of the exploitation of this virus for demagogic manipulation of the American people to serve political ends that become more obvious with each passing day. In short, Coronagate. But first, for any reader who may be new to this series, a brief reprise of a saner perspective on the Wuhan virus. As we have seen, the daily briefings of the global pandemic have degenerated into a series of episodes resembling a daytime soap opera as the virus turns. In the midst of this endless farce, we need to situate this particular virus in the context of our lived experiences with viruses. That the Wuhan virus, like influenza, can kill is obvious. My own father, having been confined to a veritable incubator of the virus, is at risk of death. If you are very elderly like my father or a younger person with a compromised immune system, any form of community-acquired pneumonia, i.e. pneumonia acquired outside of a hospital, can be fatal, whether the cause of pneumonia is bacterial or viral. The Wuhan virus kills the way other viruses kill, by descending into the lungs and causing pneumonia, often in combination with bacteria that invade inflamed lung tissue, leading to respiratory failure and death in the susceptible. The mantra that COVID-19 is not the flu, which is part of the panic narrative over this particular virus, means nothing. Conversely, the flu is not COVID-19. So what? The Wuhan virus is a novel coronavirus that can kill certain people, just like previously established viruses. Likewise, H1N1 was a novel flu virus that first appeared in 2009 as the swine flu, but has since become part of the seasonal viral burden and is now designated influenza A. Indeed, even the World Health Organization, the leading fearmonger in this case, observes of the swine flu that influenza A is similar to seasonal influenza, but has been characterized by higher activity during the northern summer season, higher fatality rates among healthy young adults, and higher incidence of viral pneumonia. There is no hard evidence, only breathless media hysteria, that the Wuhan virus is any more of a threat to public health than influenza A, which infected tens of millions of Americans and killed 18,000 in the season of its first appearance, 2009 to 2010, with most of the victims being younger than 65. The Wuhan virus, along with H1N1 or influenza A, has joined the large family of influenza and influenza-like illnesses, as the epidemiologists call them, all of them more or less potentially fatal for certain people. What is in dispute here, and rightly comes in for mockery, is not the potential lethality of this particular virus, but the ongoing COVID-19 agitprop campaign by the media, their Democratic allies, and clearly left-leaning elements of the globalist medical establishment. Above all, the WHO, funded by the Gates Foundation, and the Gates Foundation-funded Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. This agitprop aims to frighten the masses into believing that the Wuhan virus is a uniquely genocidal plague, capable of killing millions of people in this country alone, unless we mitigate the pandemic by observing social distancing. The term social distancing was originally limited to the same reasonable precautions one would observe during the flu season, but has rapidly expanded to include a completely insane and pointless national lockdown regime, so full of exceptions that its only effect is to create mass unemployment in the midst of the mass population movement still permitted for dictatorially delimited essential businesses and essential activities. The people are being asked to believe the preposterous claim that millions will die unless people stay at home, except as follows. When traveling to and from or working in the locations of essential businesses, when visiting essential supermarkets, liquor stores, convenience stores, gas stations, home improvement stores, banks, cell phone stores, automobile repair shops, pet stores, laundromats, dry cleaners, and marijuana dispensaries by prescription only in the United States. When venturing out for drive-through fast food or takeout orders at the restaurants that have not yet gone out of business. When traveling to care for relatives or other persons, as well as essential pets. When exercising outdoors. When using mass transit to engage in all of these permitted essential activities. On the other hand, the people are asked to believe that millions will die if they dare to attend mass, go to confession, or even set foot in a totally locked church, congregate in groups of more than 10 people in the open air or in their own homes, fail to remain 6 feet apart from everyone they encounter on the street, but not in jam-packed supermarkets or other essential businesses with high foot traffic, or leave their homes for such frivolous and deadly activities as a family game of t-ball in the park. Citizen, what were you thinking? This just in, the idiotic Democrat governor of Nevada, following the idiot Democrat governor of New York has not only banned social gatherings of more than 10 people, but now explicitly threatens families who dare to have Easter dinner with more than the permitted 10 family members. And don't forget the face mask. Citizen, where is your face mask? Are you trying to spew death into the air? The face masks were first dismissed as completely ineffective and even counterproductive, as the fact that they have been is irrelevant. Some 45 days into this fiasco, with the number of reported cases and daily deaths beginning to decline as the weather warms, face masks are suddenly a matter of life and death. The better to keep us mindful of the deadly pandemic for months to come. A key element of Coronagate is the ever-changing fake science model created by the Bill Gates-funded IHME. The IHME model has recently been the principal prop touted out at the daily press briefings by Dr. Deborah Birx, aka Scarf Lady, and her mentor, Dr. Anthony Fauci, aka Tony, or as we like to call him around here, Il Duce. Tony is a member of the Leadership Council of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's propaganda apparatus for global vaccine promotion, including the COVID-19 vaccine they may soon be attempting to make mandatory for all Americans. Scarf Lady, appointed by Obama as U.S. Global AIDS Coordinator, oversees the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief, which is funded by, is anyone surprised, the Gates Foundation. The IHME model is now the primary scientific driver of the immensely destructive nonsense that has shut down our entire country. It has become the model most cited by Tony and Scarf Lady, and thus by the White House Coronavirus Task Force. Long gone are Tony and Scarf Lady's laughable claims, based on the loopy Imperial College of London study, that 2.2 million Americans, more than 20 times the total world death total to date, could die without social distancing, and that up to 240,000 will die even with social distancing. Forget all that. Now, the IHME model is the thing. Yes, this one is very reliable. We must not be dissuaded of this by the model's wildly excessive predictions, all of them wrong, about how many hospitalizations, hospital beds, ICU beds, and ventilators would be needed in New York and other states. According to this latest and greatest model, the national death toll from the Wuhan virus, with social distancing, of course, will be 93,531. No, wait. 81,766. No, wait. 60,415. As the data on deaths come in, the total death predictions go down in a matter of days. The predictions merely follow the daily data, which means they aren't predictions at all, but a series of guesstimates adjusted post hoc to fit the real world. Tony and Scarf Lady have been maintaining that mitigation is the reason the IHME mortality prediction is constantly dropping. But mitigation has always been built into the prediction. The same is true of their own previous predictions of up to 240,000 deaths with mitigation. A fatal blow to their predictive credibility they hope no one will notice. As the assumption of mitigation underlies both their own earlier predictions and those of the IHME model they are now touting, it is clear that the predictions have been dropping like lead balloons, not because of mitigation, but because they were monumentally wrong from the start. And IHME's prediction still seems monumentally wrong, seeing that the U.S. death toll attributed to the Wuhan virus stands on April 9th at 16,231. Finally, if anyone still has any doubt that the Wuhan virus is being utilized as a political vehicle for social engineering by fear, consider these telling indications of deception in the IHME model. First, the banner above the model's latest prediction reads COVID-19 projections assuming full social distancing through May 2020. Second, as the AP reports, the director of the IHME, Dr. Christopher Murray, had this to say about social distancing. Our estimate assumes statewide social distancing measures are continuing in states where they have already been enacted, and for those states without such measures in place, it is assumed that they will be in place within 7 days. If social distancing measures are not relaxed or implemented, the U.S. will see greater death tolls. The death peak will be later, the burden on hospitals will be much greater, and the economic costs will continue to grow. The leftist politics in this guise of fake science could not be more blatant. Anyone with half a brain can see that the term full social distancing is not a quantity that can be plugged into an algorithm for modeling mortality predictions. Rather, is a politically fraught term with no fixed meaning, differs widely in application from place to place, is quantitatively incalculable, cannot be separated into distinct operators, e.g., hand washing versus face masks versus avoidance of non-essential movement, and is impossible to verify empirically as to compliance by innumerable different populations under differing regimes of restriction. Even more outrageous is IHME's phony prediction that many more people will die unless the remaining 8 holdout states, South Carolina came 2 days ago, adopt statewide social distancing measures within 7 days. Not 8 days or 9 days, mind you, but exactly 7 days. Not city or county social distancing measures, whatever social distancing might mean, but only statewide social distancing measures will do. We cannot even rely on the seemingly hard death data toll that have prompted drastic downward revisions of IHME's pseudoscientific predictions. We now know for certain what has already been revealed in Italy, that even the lowering number of deaths attributed to COVID-19 is inflated. During Tuesday's episode of As the Virus Turns, Scarf Lady freely admitted this in answer to a question that seemed designed to extract an admission that COVID-19 deaths were being underreported. Quote, I think that in this country, we've taken a very liberal approach to mortality. There are other countries that if you had a pre-existing condition, and let's say the virus caused you to go to the ICU and then have a heart or kidney problem, some countries are recording that as a heart issue or a kidney issue and not a COVID-19 death. Right now, we're still recording it. I mean, the great thing about having forms come in and a form that has the ability to mark it as COVID-19 infection, the intent is right now is that if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that, her emphasis, as a COVID-19 death, unquote. Oh no, dear reporter, we have not underreported COVID-19 deaths. We have deliberately overreported them. The protocol Scarf Lady described is equivalent to stating on a death certificate that someone who died from a heart attack died from prostate cancer merely because cancer cells were found in his prostate. And he goes on to talk about the Minnesota doctor and state senator, Scott Jensen, who I talked about last week. The data corruption in this country is not merely out of sloppiness or even invidious bias on the part of individual physicians. Quite the contrary. The deep state has recommended fudging the data. A Minnesota state senator, previously mentioned, said on a local TV show and then on the Laura Ingraham show that he received a 7-page set of instructions from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services via the CDC that basically coaches him to find that the virus was the cause of death, even without testing for its presence. Quote, in cases where a definite diagnosis of COVID-19 cannot be made but is suspected or likely, it is acceptable to report COVID-19 on a death certificate as probable or presumed. In these instances, certifiers should use their best clinical judgment in determining if a COVID-19 infection was likely. However, please note that testing for COVID-19 should be concluded whenever possible. Whenever possible. So deaths from COVID-19 are apparently being reported, who knows how often, without a COVID-19 test to confirm the diagnosis. And even where there is a positive test, the direct cause of death is being demoted, who knows how often, in favor of a presumed contribution by COVID-19. This is exactly the kind of data corruption that occurred in Italy. And in Italy, I believe that it has been admitted that only, I believe, 12% of the deaths are directly attributable to COVID-19. He concludes, it appears there will be no end to the search by predominantly Democrat partisans for any pretext to keep fear alive and the states under lockdown, even if Trump takes measures to open up the country. Pray to God that Trump manages to liberate himself from this astonishing, infuriating, and devastating exercise in mass imprisonment by mind-forged manacles of fear, cheered on by an array of people who want nothing more than his political destruction and the fulfillment of their dream of a new America in a post-COVID world that the globalists, including Bergoglio, that is the Pope, triumphantly declare will never be the same. So let's go to the chat, see what's going on there. MCT says Morgan Stanley publishes full timeline of upcoming coronavirus milestones. See second coronavirus peak in December. Oh, Morgan Stanley. Oh, are they epidemiologists now? I thought they were a financial institution. Chogankin 666 says, I can't get a haircut. Kevin got a black market haircut. I'm telling. Actually, I did it myself. I'm rather ashamed to admit this, but, it was getting out of control. Should have gone to a barber, as Hilar Belloc wrote. It is the duty of the gentleman to give employment to the artisan. Achilles Go said he negotiated in a back alley along with a new showerhead. Another Seinfeld reference, always appreciated. Walrus Libertarian says, stand on the dot, citizen. I've already been told off several times in various places for moving too close. Lecomte de Boreas says, people were rioting in Vancouver yesterday. Well, I will get to that. Jim Device, YouTube still shafting people about regards notifications. I don't know if it is incompetence or by design. Okay. Is KMG's Good Evening, Good Afternoon opening inspired from The Truman Show? This is a movie I have seen. It's not a movie that I liked. I thought it was dreadful, actually, except for Philip Glass. Is this music? The music by Philip Glass. Claire Caw says, I see there might have been an overshorn part on the left side. It is entirely likely. That's all I could say. I'm not very good at it, and I don't really expect that I'm going to get better if that is necessary. Again, this is from The Remnant. America is now in the grips of a struggle between two competing narratives surrounding the coronavirus that causes COVID-19, so named because it is a coronavirus disease first detected in 2019. The Republican narrative is that COVID-19 is a deadly pandemic that could kill millions, but the American people, led by President Trump, will defeat the virus in a great demonstration of American courage and resolve, no less momentous than the victory in World War II. The American economy will revive and free enterprise will flourish once again in the world's most vibrant economy, bigger and better than ever. The Democrat narrative is that COVID-19 is a deadly pandemic that could kill millions, yet Trump has failed miserably to blunt its relentless and deadly advance. The only way to save America from the deadly pandemic is to restructure the entire nation along the lines dictated by the Democrat Party's radical left wing, which now comprises essentially the entire party. Both sides agree that the most drastic emergency measures are necessary to stem the deadly pandemic, including the lockdown of entire cities and states, closure of so-called non-essential businesses, bans on public gatherings of more than a certain number of people, religious services included, social distancing, constant hand washing, and testing of vast numbers of people to see if they have the virus. Yes, I forgot to mention that it is Easter Monday, and I wish a happy Easter to my listeners. Of course, as Peter Hitchens pointed out, probably better to say Blessed Easter rather than Happy Easter because, of course, Easter, the celebration of Easter in public, has been banned all over the world. Both sides also agree that American industry must be redirected to the mass population of millions upon millions of face masks and test kits and thousands upon thousands of ventilators to save the lives of the presumed crowds of dying patients among the millions who will supposedly be infected by the virus. But both sides have generally ignored or downplayed two salient facts. One, months after the COVID-19 virus first appeared on our shores, the total American death toll from the virus stands around 800 as of March 25th. And whereas at least 23,000 Americans have died from influenza this flu season as of March 14th. Two, since 2010, anywhere from 12,000 to 61,000 Americans have died from annual seasonal influenza. I should point out that, of course, 2.8 million Americans die every year. That is a lot of people. Even when you divide it by 12 or by 365, that is still a lot of people dying every day. As Dr. Drew Pinsky, a liberal no less, has rightly observed, essentially the entire problem we're having is due to panic, not the virus. The flu virus in this country is vastly more consequential and nobody is talking about that. This is what concerns me. It is a press-induced panic that will have real consequences. It will not be the virus. So in Jim Kunstler's column today, he showed some pictures from upstate New York, where he lives. And upstate New York is, burned out? Not burned over, but that refers to religious enthusiasm. It's largely been abandoned. And so you have all of these abandoned buildings. And Kunstler notes just how quickly these buildings deteriorate without human activity taking place in them. He says things rise and self-organize beautifully into fully formed systems, and after a while they run down, even while they overgrow. Authority starts working more and more for its own sake and its own benefit. Hierarchy breaks down into disrespect, lack of trust, fear, and then society loses its vital institutions. And of course, Tainter, I talked about his book, The Collapse of Complex Societies, some months ago on the book club, and there is no question that our society is too scaled, too complex, and the COVID-19 panic disaster has brought this into high relief. American healthcare, as we call it today, and for all its high-tech miracles, has evolved into one of the most atrocious rackets the world has ever seen. By racket, I mean an enterprise organized explicitly to make money dishonestly. This is what we've become, and the fact that we seem to be okay with that tells you more about what we have become. The advent of COVID-19, along with the extreme economic disorders it has triggered, will probably be the beginning of the end of that racket. We have no idea how medicine will reorganize itself, but I'd guess that it will happen at a much more primitive scale, because that's usually what happens when human societies overshoot badly. Alas, history is not exactly symmetrical. I'm sure you have seen, as I have, all of these videos, TikTok and others, of physicians who are looking to become social media stars, and of nurses frolicking, gamboling in their supposedly packed to capacity hospitals. Well, clearly they are not packed to a capacity. What, in New York, last time I checked, 12,000 beds out of 90,000? Yes, I mean, what has happened is that so-called non-essential surgery, including breast cancer surgery, has been canceled. All sorts of appointments have been canceled, and of course, people are afraid to go to hospitals now, lest they become infected. So we all love models. We all love projections now. And I have a doozy right here. Again, this is a story which should have received much more attention than it has, but the media has decided to downplay it for obvious reasons. Up to 150,000 Britons could die from non-coronavirus causes because of the UK's draconian lockdown, it is feared. A tentative estimate circling in Whitehall suggests a six-figure death toll from a long-term lockdown caused by a spike in suicides and domestic violence. Official figures show around 9,000 Britons have already died after testing positive for COVID-19. The pandemic is expected to have a huge knock-on effect on people's mental health due to financial worries and a disruption to routine. Evidence of this is starting to emerge in small studies where the police have started to see early indications of a rise in suicide attempts. Meanwhile, charities have revealed a spike in calls from domestic abuse victims who are forced to stay indoors with their abusers. Pressure is mounting on the government to outline exactly how the lockdown will be lifted in order to give hope to the millions struggling. The social damage caused by pausing normal life is beginning to be weighed up by experts in comparison to the coronavirus itself. I just say, in my own case, I've just been shocked that the days all melt into each other. It's just like custard or pudding. I walk out into the streets, and the streets are largely deserted. Most of these stores are closed. I should mention that I am staying in a hotel, and it looks like, I know for certain that I'm going to be staying for another week because I have nowhere else to go. This hotel is on the inner harbor of Victoria, about a block and a half from the British Columbia legislature. At this time of year, especially since the weather has been beautiful for the last week, one would expect it to be absolutely teeming with people. But again, it is largely deserted. It's eerie. It's completely eerie. You know, I have to disabuse myself of the notion that, I don't know what, that I've died and gone to hell, or that I have gone insane, because clearly this cannot be happening. It's just too stupid. Fraser Nelson, editor of The Spectator and political columnist for The Telegraph, spoke of the stark 150,000 figure. He said work is being done to add it all up and produce a figure for avoidable deaths that could, in the long term, be caused by lockdown. I'm told the early attempts have produced a figure of 150,000, far greater than those expected to die of COVID. This is, of course, a model, but estimates of lockdown victims are being shared among those in government who worry about the social damage now underway, the domestic violence, the depression, even suicides accompanying the mass bankruptcies. Yes, I see a great spike in suicides. Yes, your job is gone. When is it coming back? Not allowed to leave your home, assuming that you can afford to pay for it. Oh, and there is no end in sight. That would seem to be the definition of a hopeless situation. Would it not? Let's talk about Bill Gates. I know a lot of people have always long hated Bill Gates. That is not the case with me. I find his story to be quite an impressive one. He virtually founded or co-founded the personal computer industry, establishing standards that exist to this day. He proved himself to be a very canny businessman. I mean, he ended up paying $7,000 for DOS. He got this off the shelf, and Microsoft made billions of dollars out of it. But he's been distancing himself from Microsoft. He no longer sits on the board, and he has a new mission, along with his wife, Melinda Gates, who is now some sort of expert in something or other, some sort of impressive figure, rather like Michelle Obama. Melinda Gates was a marketing manager at Microsoft, and then she married the boss. As they say, she made her money the old-fashioned way. This is a story from National File by Patrick Howley. President Donald Trump is fighting to find a medical solution for coronavirus in the short term, expressing hope that the anti-malaria drug chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, can help patients suffering from the Chinese virus. The truth is that Trump is locked into an intense power struggle with Bill Gates, who is pushing his vaccines, which may not be available to the public until after November's election. Gates has a lot of pull in the medical world. He has a multi-million-dollar relationship with Dr. Fauci, and Il Duce originally took the Gates line supporting vaccines and casting doubt on chloroquine. Coronavirus response team member, Dr. Deborah Birx, appointed by former President Obama to serve as United States Global AIDS Coordinator, also sits on the board of a group that has received billions from Gates' foundation, and Birx reportedly used a disputed Bill Gates-funded model for the White House's coronavirus effort. Now, I should point out again, because I think that this is vital information, that Dr. Anthony Fauci had a previous moment in the sun, which was in the late 1980s, in which he insisted for years against all evidence that AIDS was everyone's disease, everyone's problem, that heterosexual men and women were at tremendous risk for AIDS, which turned out to be one of the greatest medical hoaxes of the 20th century and should have destroyed Fauci's reputation. But these people never pay for their blunders. They just continue to rise. Gates is a big proponent for a population lockdown scenario for the coronavirus outbreak. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease Director Fauci, who is represented by the Aurum Speakers Bureau, initially criticized Trump's hopeful assessment of chloroquine, saying in an interview with CNN's Anderson Cooper that there's no magic drug for coronavirus right now, and lectured, "Let me put it into perspective for the viewers. There has been anecdotal, non-proven data that it works. But when you have an uncontrolled trial, you can never definitely say that it works." Well, that is absolutely amusing for a major figure in the American medical establishment to say, because it may still be the case, but for decades, there was not a single successful double-blind test of any AIDS drugs. Not one. The tests were all busted for this reason, that the patients talked among themselves. So the group which was getting the placebo talked with the group which was getting the trial medicine, and they swapped medicines for this reason, that the people getting the placebo thought this was terribly unfair, and a great many of the people who were getting the trial drug refused to take it anymore because it was making them deathly ill. Fauci is pushing the talking point that things will never go back to normal in our society until we have the ability to mass vaccinate people, echoing Bill Gates' assertion that mass gatherings in our culture may not come back at all before mass vaccinations. Well, if you're looking to shut down society for your own political purposes, then I guess you wouldn't want vaccines, because we hear from Trudeau and the British government and Bill Gates that no, there's not going to be any going back to what existed before without the vaccine. Fauci downplayed the threat of coronavirus on January 21st in a Newsmax TV interview, saying, quote, "This is not a major threat for the people in the United States, and this is not something that the citizens of the United States right now should be worried about," unquote. Well, I guess he was getting his advice from the World Health Organization, who were getting their advice from the People's Republic of China. Howley had tweeted, "Why is Fauci so tight with the press?" He gestured positively in the direction of John Carl, who lobbied him the softball that led Fauci to say that things might never go back to normal without vaccinations. Fauci later said that people would not have to change their daily activities as a result of the coronavirus outbreak. Yes, on February 29th, he said that. But Fauci's NIAID actually funded a study on bat coronavirus, which was a project that included scientists at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the Chinese lab at the center of controversy over their bat research. That study confirmed in 2018 that humans have died from coronavirus. An excerpt from an April 4, 2008 entry from the NIAID: "New coronavirus emerges from bats in China, devastates young swine." A newly identified coronavirus that killed nearly 25,000 piglets in 2016 to 17 in China emerged from horseshoe bats near the origin of the severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus. Additionally, the Daily Mail reported that National Institutes of Health, of which Fauci's NIAID is a member, provided a $3.7 million grant to the Wuhan Institute of Virology to study bat-borne coronavirus. That study was headlined, "Discovery of a rich gene pool of bat SARS-related coronaviruses provides new insight into the origin of SARS coronavirus." So what is really going on here? The true behind-the-scenes story is coming to light. Bill Gates cast doubt on chloroquine and said he is running a study on it. Here's what he said in a Reddit Ask Me Anything session. "There are a lot of therapeutic drugs being examined. This is one of many, but is not proven. If it works, we will need to make sure the finite supplies are held for the parties who need it most. We have a study going on to figure this out." Gates is funding coronavirus vaccine candidates that would compete with chloroquine, and Dr. Fauci's agency is co-partnering on the project. The company Moderna is working on a coronavirus vaccine, which they expect will go into clinical trials in April. Dr. Fauci has heaped praise on Moderna and said that a vaccine is the only way to definitively assure the end of the virus. According to the New Eastern Outlook, Gates Foundation money is backing vaccine development on every front. Innovio Pharmaceuticals of Pennsylvania received $9 million from the Gates-backed CEPI, Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, to develop a vaccine which is about to test on humans in April, a suspiciously rapid time frame. In addition, Gates Foundation just gave the company an added $5 million to develop a proprietary smart device for intradermal delivery of the new vaccine. Now, so the political and social policy of the United States of America is being directed by a man, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who has close ties with Bill Gates and the Bill Gates Foundation. He has a conflict of interest, very much a conflict of interest here. Bill Gates is not a physician. I don't hold it against him personally, but he doesn't even have a university degree. But of course, as we learned from Silicon Valley, it seems that pretty much all the greatest developments in Silicon Valley came from men without university degrees. Oh, and who else stands to benefit? Key bono from this coronavirus panic. Here's a story from ccn.com. What if Jeff Bezos tries to acquire the struggling U.S. Postal Service? The USPS appears to be on its last legs, which means power-hungry CEOs like Jeff Bezos could swoop in and acquire them. What would it mean for us if Amazon purchased the struggling service? Well, I guess it would mean that everything we buy comes from Amazon, and of course it's delivered by Amazon. Got that virtual integration going. Let's go back to the chat just for a minute. Okay, a lot of talk about Claire Ka. What is this? Nicola Chick said there are worse viruses than the China virus. Who, Islam, socialism are a few. Okay. Okay, a lot of internal chat here. All right. Talk about bat soup. I just can't. There's a video of a Chinese woman clipping a hedge, and she notices some noise, and she finds a hatchling, a bird hatchling, and with little or no hesitation, she just pops the thing in her mouth and swallows it. Very, 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 very strange activity. This is why we have separate countries, as they say. It seems like a very nice hotel. It is a very nice hotel. It's certainly the nicest hotel that I have ever stayed in. So, okay. And the lockdown now is trending. And like the previous hashtag in the lockdown, this has inspired just absolute rage, mostly from women. A lot of profanity. How dare you? Why aren't you grateful for the government for, smashing the economy and dissolving society, as well as, stripping away our civil liberties? You must be grateful. Yes. Vancouver. Big trouble. Big trouble in Vancouver. With nearly half of city residents losing work, Vancouver could face insolvency. This is from Sunday. The mayor of Vancouver says that he is deeply concerned that the city could face insolvency after a survey of residents showed that nearly half of all homeowners may not be able to pay their mortgages in May. Kennedy Stewart is repeating his call for the province to immediately give financial help to the city, a call echoed by other BC municipalities to stave off that possibility. An online survey shows that nearly half of city residents, 46%, have lost their job or are working much less, meaning their income has dropped. A quarter of residents surveyed said their income had significantly declined. The survey showed 68% of homeowners were able to pay their full mortgage in April, and 55% say they will be able to make a full payment in May. When it comes to renters, 70% said that they could make a full rent payment in April, and 63% said they would be able to pay their full rent amount in May. Those figures point to the possibility of a widespread default on property taxes, Stewart said, which is a key source for city coffers. BC municipalities are not legally allowed to run a deficit. According to the Local Government Act and the Vancouver Charter, local governments can't run a budget deficit without special approval from voters or from the province. The only way we can stay afloat is with the help of the federal and provincial government, Stewart said. Otherwise, local governments will be forced to take drastic measures that will hurt residents and businesses and significantly slow any post-pandemic economic recovery. Let's say they're not going to collect your garbage anymore, and that's permanent. That's part of the new normal because we just don't have the money. Now, it's interesting that Stewart says the only way that this could be dealt with is with money from the provincial government. Of course, the provincial government has no money now. He doesn't suggest ending the lockdown now because apparently that's just a given. That's just a given that is going to stay until there's a vaccine. If people aren't working, they don't have money for rent, they don't have money for mortgages, they don't have money, for, I suppose, just the basic essentials. And so where's the government going to get the money to bail out the provinces and for the provinces to bail out the cities? Are we going to have a Weimar situation? Could be. From Bloomberg. Oh, yes. Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis President Neil Kashkari, who apparently is an epidemiologist and modeler himself, says, and this is according to Bloomberg, without an effective therapy or a vaccine for the novel coronavirus, the U.S. economy could face 18 months of rolling shutdowns as the outbreak recedes and flares up again, said Kashkari. Now, just keep in mind that as we know from Iceland, which is the only country in the world which has tested random people, it is entirely likely that half or much more than half of everybody in the Western world already has it. We're looking around the world. As they relax the economic controls, the virus flares back up again. Oh no, Kashkari said Sunday on CBS's Face the Nation. He is a voter in 2020 on the Fed's policy-setting Federal Open Market Committee. We could have these waves of flare-ups and controls until we actually get a therapy or a vaccine. I think we should all be focusing on an 18-month strategy for our healthcare system and our economy. Unemployment has skyrocketed in the U.S. over the last few weeks as state and local governments have ordered businesses to close their doors in a bid to contain the spread of the virus. And there's a quote from Il Duce. I guess every story about this must have a quote from him. The Fed has more firepower to bring to bear if needed. Cleveland Fed Chief Loretta Mester, also a 2020 voter, said Friday that the central bank was likely not done in seeking ways to keep credit flowing in the economy. There's a planted axiom here that the people of the United States, people of Canada, people of Britain, et cetera, are just going to take it. They're just going to be told, yeah, there's no more economy anymore. And there's no more society anymore. When will this end up? When there's a vaccine, when will that be? We don't know. A riot in Vancouver over the weekend? Well, apparently there were a few dozen people on the streets demanding to end the lockdown now, which led to absolute hysteria on the internet. How dare these people act like this? They should be grateful to our dictators for smashing the economy and dissolving the society. I see this as an entirely hopeful sign, and I fully expect more of it. I was joking yesterday that I've long believed that my only usefulness in any kind of apocalyptic scenario would be as a political demagogue. Workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your panic. Frankly, I think that a populist revolt of this kind is exceedingly likely unless the madness ends, and soon. From the New York Times, the worst is over, Governor Cuomo says, as 7 states ally to reopen economy. The governors of 6 eastern states will cooperate on reopening, and the states are New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and Delaware. They would work together to plan for reopening the region's economy, schools, and other important elements. Cuomo said that health and economic officials from the 6 states were starting work immediately on developing strategies for easing restrictions. Later in the day, Cuomo's office said that Massachusetts would be part of the coalition. Now, wait a minute. Aren't we told that the virus is going to come back? It's going to keep coming back. But Cuomo and other governors seem to think that, the worst is over. Let's be smart and let's be cooperative and let's learn from one another, he said. The 7 states together have recorded over 325,000 confirmed virus cases, more than half of the U.S. total, and nearly 14,400 deaths, around 63% of the country's total. Again, keep in mind that the CDC has instructed American doctors to attribute, well, not all deaths, but the deaths of people who have coronavirus to coronavirus, even if they haven't been tested. This is exactly what happened with AIDS in Africa, that in a search for aid money, all deaths were attributed to HIV, AIDS, even car crashes. I mean, I suppose it could be argued that someone is gravely injured in a car accident, and maybe it was COVID-19 that pushed him over the top. So we'll put that down as the cause of death, even if that person hasn't been tested for it. This is absolute insanity. Cuomo said on Monday for the first time that he believed the most horrific phase of the coronavirus outbreak may have passed. I believe the worst is over. If we continue to be smart, I believe we can start on the path to normalcy. But the governor wavered on the pronouncement several times, asked a follow-up question at the briefing about whether he was confident the worst was indeed over. Cuomo said he was not. He repeated that the state was experiencing plateaus in key categories, but if New Yorkers did not continue to follow the current restrictions, the situation could worsen. Well, that's just not so. I mean, we know about this virus. We know a lot about it, actually, in terms of who it kills. The average age in Italy, it's the average or the median, I forget which, is 79. The other one is 78. Yeah. There is a nursing home in Lynn Valley in North Vancouver, just 2 blocks away from where I used to live years ago. They have 18 deaths. In fact, close to half of the deaths, all deaths in British Columbia, which has a population of 5.1 million, come from 2 old age homes. And there's an even more shocking situation in the province of Quebec. Even if the outbreak had reached its apex, the governor said there would be weeks of suffering to come. He noted how many people were still dying of the virus. He said the number of deaths, while basically flat, was basically flat at a horrific level of pain and grief and sorrow. Yes, is that something that can be quantified? Pain and grief and sorrow? Okay, more bad news from experts. From the Washington Post, which is owned by, wait for it, Jeff Bezos. Reopening U.S. economy by May the 1st may be unrealistic. Public health experts on Sunday debated the question of when to reopen portions of the U.S. economy shuttered because of the coronavirus pandemic, with several Trump administration officials cautioning that a target date of May 1 may not be realistic. It is a target, and obviously we're hopeful about that target, but I think it's just too early to be able to tell that we might see light at the end of the tunnel. If there's no end at the light of the tunnel, why do any of us bother to keep going? Yes, I've mentioned this before. I think it's true, so I'll say it again. I really get the strong impression that these obscure health bureaucrats are enjoying their time in the sun so much that they don't want to return to obscurity. Oh, and there's the mandatory quotation from Il Duce. It's not going to be a light switch. It's going to be depending where you are in the country, the nature of the outbreak you've already experienced, and the threat of an outbreak that you may not have experienced. The transition could probably start in at least some ways, maybe next month, but he noted that the virus could resurge later in the year. You know, if Andrew Cuomo were to say, okay, that's it, we're going back to normal, he would become a national hero. And the chances of him displacing Joe Biden at the top of the Democratic ticket would be very high indeed. Someone's got to show leadership here. Someone has got to show some bravery. Oh, and Fauci he's engaged in some self-criticism. He admits lives could have been saved if the U.S. had shut down in February, but the recommendation not taken. This is the same fellow who said that it was not a problem. Why are we listening to him? Even aside his very disturbing relationship with the sinister Bill Gates. So there's been talk of Fauci being fired. But it would seem he's just indispensable. Nope. They say no one is indispensable, but apparently Fauci is. This is from NPR. That Fauci does not appear to be in immediate danger of being fired. The White House rejected what it called speculation about that prospect, even though President Trump retweeted a tweet on Sunday that included the hashtag #FireFauci. And there's some criticism here. In the original tweet from Deanna Lorraine for Congress, Fauci is now saying that had Trump listened to the medical experts earlier, he could have saved more lives. Fauci was telling people on February the 29th that there was nothing to worry about and that it posed no threat to the U.S. public at large. Time to #FireFauci. Trump responded, sorry, fake news. It's all on tape. I banned China long before people spoke up. And of course, there was withering criticism of him for this, that it was xenophobic, that it was racist. Joe Biden was the leader in this criticism, but of course now he's forgotten that he actually said that. And I believe that at his press conference today, Trump played a compilation of all of the stupid things said by the media about the coronavirus, that stigmatization, racism, they're the real deadly diseases, not the coronavirus, which again was the World Health Organization line, which it got from the People's Republic of China. This media chatter is ridiculous. President Trump is not firing Dr. Fauci, White House spokesman Hogan Gidley said in a statement on Monday. Gidley said Trump's tweet was an attempt to deflate a narrative that Trump had acted too slowly in response to the pandemic. Quote, Dr. Fauci has been and remains a trusted advisor to President Trump. Unquote. Okay, from Axios. And Axios mentions the retweet. The state of play, Fauci, who has advised 6 presidents, and was he advising them, presumably, that AIDS was everyone's disease? He's held high government office back to 1984, is heralded on the cover of the forthcoming issue of The New Yorker as the most trusted man in America. And rising celebrity is always dangerous for a Trump advisor. The Drudge Report bannered the exchange between them. Fauci downloads on Trump. Ann Coulter weighs in. It's probably a coincidence, but I noticed that as businesses go under, jobs are lost, careers are ended, and trillions of dollars are drained from the economy. The people most avidly pushing the coronavirus panic are doing quite well. No politician or government official has taken a salary cut. To the contrary, dusty bureaucrats now find the entire country transfixed by their every utterance. Cable news hosts still make millions of dollars, and now they get to work from home. Annoyingly, though, journalists can't seem to relay the basic elements of a news story: who, what, where, and why. First, who's dying? It appears to be mostly the old, people with specific medical conditions and vapors. To be sure, that's not as important as daily updates on Chris Cuomo's personal battle with the coronavirus, but it might be kind of important to the 17 million Americans who've been thrown out of work, many of whom are not elderly, immunocompromised, or vapors. Second, the what. What exactly constitutes a coronavirus death? It turns out that a person with stage 4 lung cancer and a bullet through the heart will be counted as a coronavirus death if he also tested positive for the disease or merely exhibited symptoms associated with it, symptoms that are coextensive with the flu and pneumonia. We're told that, if anything, coronavirus deaths are being undercounted because the numbers don't include those who die of it at home. If so, then the death count also excludes those who die at home of other things, like heart attacks and poisonings. Many of these people might have survived, except they were too scared to go to a hospital or couldn't find an EMT to take them there per current edicts. The where is, where did the virus originate and where did it first land in this country? Despite the media's best efforts, don't call it the Chinese virus. People know that the virus began at a wet market in China, but where did it start in this country? Washington State was the site of our very first case. Washington State is also 9.3 Asian. Even now, it has 8 times more coronavirus cases per capita than neighboring Oregon, which is 4.8% Asian. Could it be that Chinese Americans have more contact with the epicenter of this plague than other Americans? As always, the left lectures us, believe the science. The virus next leapt to New York State, 9% Asian, and New Jersey, 10% Asian. The worst hit borough of Manhattan is Queens. Guess which borough has the most Asians? Elmhurst Hospital in Queens is the worst hit hospital in the nation. Elmhurst neighborhood, 50% Asian. Notice a pattern? While it's true that viruses don't have nationalities, and thank you very much for pointing that out, media, the carriers of viruses do have nationalities. Arguably, Trump had a reason to shut down travel from China other than hysteria, xenophobia, and fear-mongering, as Joe Biden claimed in a tweet on February the 1st. Of course, once it's here and can spread all over. Still, compare New York and New Jersey to, say, Montana and West Virginia. And Montana is 0.9% Asian. West Virginia is 0.8% Asian. But the virus deaths in New York, 29 per 100,000. New Jersey, 13 per 100,000. Montana, 0.6 per 100,000. And West Virginia, which again is only 0.8 Asian, 0.2 per 100,000. Isn't the prevalence of the coronavirus in states with high Asian populations at least as interesting as this recent article in the New York Times Magazine? Story summary: man with severe asthma gets coronavirus, has low-grade fever for approximately 10 days with muscle pain, nausea, and fatigue, develops walking pneumonia per x-ray, no clinical evidence, recovers, the end. Finally, why? Why do we have to deal with this virus at all? The media would prefer if you would stop asking this question, but Americans who didn't have to die are dead because of Wall Street's decision to merge our economy with the Chinese, who have unusual eating habits. The Chinese eat wolf pups, but eating dog wasn't weird enough. It didn't give them a frisson of freakishness. They also eat bats, snakes, and chicken testicles. Again. Tigers and rhinos are the most endangered species on Earth because Chinese people think rhinoceros horns and tiger penises can cure impotence. The Caspian Valley and Javan tigers are already extinct because of this charming folk remedy. Recently added to the endangered species list is the cute, cartoonish pangolin, the most trafficked animal in the world. Unfortunately, the pangolin's scales are believed to cure any number of ailments, according to traditional Chinese media. Where's PETA? The media are too busy covering for China. At least the Chinese aren't white. Okay, so we've had all manner of coronavirus-related stories, and many of them have been really stupid. This is one of the stupidest, and it's from Breitbart. American Surgeon General Jerome Adams expressed the frustration of trying to communicate the principles of health during the coronavirus crisis in a partisan, politicized media environment, writes Charlie Spearing. In an interview with SiriusXM's Breitbart News Daily host Alex Marlow, Adams said it was shocking his words were willfully misportrayed and mischaracterized by many in the establishment media. It is the challenge of communicating in a highly partisan and political environment, he said, and I just want to talk about health and medicine. Unfortunately, we're having to deal with the fact that everything is viewed through a political lens. White House reporter Yamiche Alcindor challenged Adams for using the terms Big Mama and Granddaddy and Abuela on Friday, while speaking to the Black and Hispanic communities about fighting the spread of the coronavirus. We need you to do this, Adams said. If not for yourself, then for your Abuela. Do it for your granddaddy. Do it for your Big Mama. Do it for your pop. Adams said he was speaking from his own experience as a Black man and having a Puerto Rican niece who referred to her grandmother as Abuela. One of the things I'm realizing when I'm standing in the White House next to the President of the United States, when I say things that are questioned and people question my authenticity, he said. I really do try to be America's doctor, and I'm proud to be appointed by the Trump administration to be in this incredibly important role. So here you see a Black man who is working in a high position for the Trump administration, and that is not supposed to happen because I suppose all Black people are required to hate Donald Trump and his administration. And here's a story from the Dudoy file. For months, scientists, this is from ZDNet. For months, scientists have been poring over data about cases and deaths to understand why it is that the COVID-19 manifests itself in different ways around the globe. Now, one of the largest studies conducted of COVID-19 infection in the US has found that obesity of patients was the single biggest factor after age and whether those with COVID-19 had to be admitted to a hospital. Christopher Petrilli of the NYU Grossman School and colleagues wrote in a paper, the chronic condition with the strongest association with critical illness was obesity with a substantially higher odds ratio than any cardiovascular or pulmonary disease. Among other things, the presence of obesity in the study points to a potentially important role of heightened inflammation in patients, a phenomenon that has been a topic of much speculation in numerous studies of the disease. As I mentioned last week, your weight is the single biggest indicator of how long you will live. And if you want to live to be quite old, and I suppose you want to be mobile, not have your limbs chopped off because of diabetes, you want to be thin. And I don't know. I guess this is shocking news that obesity, particularly morbid obesity, is really not good for one's health. So what's happening in the rest of the world? Well, the US version of the London Sun, not over yet. France extends coronavirus lockdown for a month as President Emmanuel Macron apologizes for government not being prepared enough. Macron said that restrictions that started on March 17th would continue to be enforced strictly until May 11th as the country's death toll rose to almost 15,000. Addressing the nation from the Élysée Palace in Paris, the French president said that after May 11th, the lockdown could slowly be relaxed. That will include the gradual reopening of schools, creches, colleges, and high schools. Larger public events at restaurants, cafes, and bars aren't expected to open before mid-July. That is to say, if they still exist by that time. Macron said that this relaxing of the rules will only be possible if we continue to be responsible civic, respecting the rules, and that the spread of the virus has actually continued to slow. Well, we have influenza, which comes every year. And somehow it didn't manage to kill everyone or scare us all to death, that it was going to kill everyone when people were coming closer than 6 feet to each other. And Britain. Oh, let's go to Sweden first. Sweden was a surprising beacon of light in the panic. Too good to last. From the Daily Mail, Sweden faces stricter quarantine as the prime minister admits measures were not good enough, while Austria is set to begin easing lockdown and Denmark gets ready to reopen schools. Stefan Löfven, Sweden's prime minister, said today that after taking a flexible approach to restricting movements within its borders, the country's coronavirus measures were not good enough. He has faced criticism over Sweden's decision to not close bars, cafes, and restaurants and merely advise residents to follow social distancing guidelines. Yeah, that's what globalism means, that no country is allowed to be different. If the consensus is that everyone should jump off the cliff, if you decide not to jump off the cliff, you will be bullied incessantly until you jump off the cliff. Let's see. Fran says, Kevin looking sharp. Nicola Chick says, great tie. Yes, this is my Flags of Revolutionary Era America tie, which is my favorite. Chokakin666 said, I used my personal trimmer to give myself a haircut. Didn't work out great. Yeah, I have two of these personal trimmers, which I used along with a pair of scissors. Chogakin666 also says they were really running with the Hart Island mass grave hoax. They bury the indigent like that monthly. Yes. And one would have thought that reporters from New York City would know about Hart Island, but I guess it's no longer necessary for reporters to know anything about the city in which they live and which they write about. Nikolachek says suicide will rise. Yes, exactly. A pied-à-terre in the Sherry, Netherlands. I've heard of people living in hotels. Douglas MacArthur spent his, last 13 years living in a suite, the Waldorf Astoria in New York City. I don't know. Seems strange. Ricardo Williams says evil shall be wiped away. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that. Thomas Molnar said that the belief that utopian movements will one day disappear is itself a utopian belief. But of course, he was probably referring to what? The end times? Okay, let's scroll down, see what else we got. Why does the West trade with China, says Calex Rose? Because there's a lot of money in it for the globalists and for the 1%. You don't have to pay your own people. You don't have to pay decent wages. You don't have to meet regulatory concerns, environmental concerns. It's much more efficient that way. Okay, let's go back to it here. We were talking, here's a voice of sanity from Britain. Ministers faced fresh calls today to publish their exit strategy for the coronavirus lockdown today. The former Bank of England Governor Lord King said that a trial and error reopening of schools and some businesses should be considered to help restart the economy. The crossbench peer called for the government to be clear about the obstacles it faces in lifting the current showdown, saying, I don't think it's sensible to just tell us all to stay indoors. No, it is not, and it is going to lead to a revolutionary situation if this keeps up for much longer. All the same people who are on Twitter screaming obscenities against those of us who are calling for the lockdown to be ended now, they'll just snap one day. Wait and see. I hope it doesn't come to that. The cabinet has divided into hawks who want to lift the lockdown in a few weeks and doves who want to delay until late May at the earliest. But no, it's going to come back. Oh, bigger and badder than ever. Lord King said, if we can allow schools, young people, some businesses to start up while maintaining social distancing, then I think we achieve our objectives, but it's bound to be a process of trial and error. He said the government can rely on the common sense of people and should outline the challenges faced given the lack of a vaccine and treatment. Lord King added, we do run a risk that there will be more infections spreading. Well, police were called, a massive raid, dozens of policemen to a house party in Britain over the weekend. With the Daily Mail, which seems to be split down the middle on this railing against COVIDiots. Yeah. Very clever. Very clever indeed. Peter Hitchens, who has been one of the rare voices of sanity in Britain, relates a personal experience in his Mail on Sunday column. Until I started traveling in the communist world, my main experience of living under tyranny was my time at a boarding school on the edge of Dartmoor 60 years ago. The headmaster, an enormous booming man, had many fine qualities, but he was given to dreadful rages which tended to strike late on Saturday afternoons. He would throb with fury because some of the more loutish boys had left their game clothes on the changing room floor. For some reason, he viewed this as a terrible crime closely related to murder. So he would summon us into the assembly hall and harangue us as darkness fell outside. The more we stood mulishly in front of him, saying nothing and with our eyes downcast, the angrier he became. Sometimes he would hold up a pair of muddy football shorts as horrific evidence of the latest atrocity. Collective punishments, a ban on eating toast, or the cancellation of a promised film show would follow, along with more shouting and angry notices in red ink threatening worse to come. Most of us were guiltless of wrongdoing, but we were small and he was huge. The staff seemed more scared of him than we were. We were on a windswept hilltop miles from anywhere. We had no escape. We assumed our letters home were censored, so we put up with these ludicrous exhibitions and waited for the storm to pass. Oddly enough, the terror did not work. People carried on, leaving their clothes on the floor just the same. I had thought such childish things were long over in my life, but a week ago I found that I was once again living at the mercy of an equally petulant would-be despot. Matthew Hancock, Secretary of State for Health, went on national TV to threaten to ban outdoor exercise if people continue to break social distancing rules. From a government that claims to be preserving life and health, this threat was literally mad. Banning exercise for any length of time will lead to the deaths and illness of many thousands of currently healthy older people who know that such exercise is vital to their physical and mental well-being. Such exercise can easily be taken while maintaining the required distance from others. The threat was a dictatorial one of collective punishment of all for the wrongdoing of others. This is illegal under Article 33 of the 1949 Geneva Conventions. A foreign occupier would not be allowed to do it. Hancock also said it was quite extraordinary that some people had spent the weekend sunbathing in public places despite it being against government guidance. Getting into his stride, he urged people not to sit down even for a minute on a park bench, saying those who disobeyed the rules were putting their own and others' lives at risk. What is this nonsense? The words of ministers and the words and actions of the police show a pointlessly bossy side to these measures. The attempted ban on Easter egg purchases, the sunbathing squad, alleged arrests of people for just buying wine and crisps, the lumpish threat by a police chief to search the baskets of shoppers. Provided the people doing these things do not break the distancing rules, why are they wrong? Sunbathing, for instance, probably reduces the risk of infection, and if people keep a proper distance apart, what on earth is wrong with it? Why shouldn't someone sit on a park bench? Hancock said, I say this to the small minority of people who are breaking the rules or pushing the boundaries. You are risking your own life and the lives of others, and you're making it harder for us all. It was only reading this latest column by Hitchens that I remembered a similar thing was common when I was in elementary school many decades ago, that someone had done something to the annoyance of a teacher and wouldn't fess up, or the teacher was simply browned off with us for, I don't know, anything. And all of us would be required to stay after school, for what, a half an hour, 45 minutes. Sometimes we would be required, I'm not making this up, to put our hands behind our heads and stare forward while in our desks. And again, I suppose like Peter Hitchens, I thought that this sort of nonsense of the collective punishment was over when I left school. But now it's come back. Again, the price of matriarchy is eternal panic. Dominic Raab, who's co-prime minister now reveals lockdown will continue and warns the worst is yet to come. Politicians used to be in the business of the best is yet to come, or, we are going to fight the enemy and we're going to win. And now they just seem to like to make people miserable. There's no end in sight. Again, these are not the kind of statements that induce compliance in people. Oh, yes, Britain's death toll could be double official tally as care home's whistleblower says coronavirus is being airbrushed off death certificates, and ex-minister claims residents are left like lambs to the slaughter. Oh, so we have to rely on the science. We have to rely on the numbers. And now we're told, I don't know, why don't you just double them, triple them, quadruple them, prescribe every single death to coronavirus. That'll keep the panic going for an awfully long time. Frank Ferruti writes in Spiked today what COVID-19 has revealed about the culture wars. Catastrophic events like this pandemic force us to examine and in some cases rethink how we see the world. Sometimes they also shed light on important trends and patterns of behavior that predated the pandemic. Consequently, it is now possible to see and understand the culture wars that have divided societies for more than 3 decades in a new light. So what have recent events taught us about the dynamic and drivers of the culture wars? They are not going away anytime soon. It has not become clear that even a deadly pandemic could lead to a truce in the culture wars. On the contrary, COVID-19 has raised the stakes and intensified pre-existing conflicts to the point that just about any new detail that emerges from the pandemic is seized upon as vindication of one's previous point of view. Consequently, culture warriors are not interested in the number of deaths or the statistics regarding the health and economic consequences of the pandemic. Their main aim is to highlight the supposedly unfair consequences of the pandemic and its management for their chosen identity group or cause. If coronavirus doesn't discriminate, how come Black people are bearing the brunt? Asks Afua Hirsch, a columnist in The Guardian. Similar questions have been posed about the impact of COVID on other minorities and on women. We know that more men are dying than women. First off, we know why Black people are dying disproportionately. Obesity, diabetes, hypertension, etc. The culture wars are so deeply entrenched that they make it very difficult to forge a sense of genuine unity in the face of common foe. That's what multiculturalism means. Multiculturalism is a universal solvent. It destroys community. And that's one of the things that COVID-19 has taught us. Not that I think that this message is liable to be appreciated or even understood. This is why the instinctive response of both sides of the cultural divide in the United States was to use the pandemic as a pretext for settling old scores. As the pandemic spread across America, New Jersey's Democratic governor made a point of refusing to declare gun shops an essential service that could stay open. In their wisdom, Republicans in Texas and Mississippi decided that nothing was more urgent than to try to limit access to abortion provision. Well, it's not just abortions. As I say, breast cancer surgery has been deemed non-essential. In the past, when faced with a common enemy, such as Nazi Germany during the Second World War, ideological differences were put aside in a common effort to defend the nation. It is unclear whether such unity could be forged if society was confronted by a similar external foe today. No, it could not. If no risk is an acceptable level of risk, if a modern-day Hitler were to tell Britain that they must surrender to Germany or they will be attacked, well, I guess the matriarchal decision would be, well, I guess that Chancellor Hitler then is going to have Britain, because it is simply unacceptable for young men, and I suppose now young women, to lose their lives in a cause that might not triumph. According to reports, at least initially, social distancing in the United States was polarized along party lines. Supporters of Trump were skeptical and made a feature of not taking social distancing seriously. Meanwhile, their opponents were much more likely to live according to the advice offered by experts. Reports indicate that Democrats were likely to say that the pandemic was worse than it appeared, while Republicans would say it's bad. But it's getting better. In a pandemic, you can't do without experts, so pre-existing differences have also been refracted through many of us embracing experts whose outlook most corresponds with our personal views. In the UK, those who support a total lockdown prefer the doomsday scenario of the Imperial College modelers to the more modest prognosis put out by Oxford University. I should mention, as I have previously, that Imperial College has been shown to be wrong, wildly wrong, over and over again. But they're still experts. In recent times, numerous commentators have raised questions about the modern world's runaway economy, its obsession with consumerism and growth. Some have pointed to the virtues of working at home and of slowing down. Since the lockdowns began, many commentators have suggested that domestic life, especially with the aid of online opportunities, has its good points. Online yoga classes, Zoom cocktail sessions, baking cakes, and living a more frugal but wholesome life supposedly allow these people to minimize their concern about the devastating economic and social consequences of society's response to the pandemic. What all this misses is that even during this crisis, there are millions of people working in the supply chain, delivering stuff to people's homes and running essential services. This pandemic is differentially experienced by those who work at home and those who do not. In most instances, this difference is primarily one of class. For many working class people, the threat posed by the pandemic is as much about economic survival as about physical health. But for some culture warriors, such attitudes smack of right-wing contrarianism. Dismissing concerns about the economy as a symptom of indifference to life, Polly Toynbee claims, and Polly Toynbee has been one of the biggest nuisances of British society for, well, decades. Polly Toynbee claims that divisions on the questions of your money or your life has sparked the latest culture war. In many instances, those who are at home and those who continue to work have different cultural values from one another. Those who have to work are not particularly worried about the culture of consumerism or the perils of economic growth. On the other side, there are those who do not want to return to the days of economic growth. Green zealots regard COVID as a useful exemplar of what they mean when they talk about a climate emergency. From their perspective, the loss of freedom brought on by emergency measures is precisely the kind of world that they would like to see in the future. Yes, a massive Malthusian die-off. That would be the result. Yes, there have been other news stories. Just briefly, this is a good news story from the Remnant. It appears justice is finally served in the Kangaroo Court. The High Court of Australia overturned Cardinal Pell's sexual assault conviction and has ordered that he be released from prison. He was accused of sexual abuse in 2018 and has been in prison since February 2019. His appeal to the Victorian High Court was dismissed in August of last year, at which time he took his appeal to the High Court, the equivalent of Supreme Court in the U.S. He denied all charges, which came from the unsubstantiated testimony of a single person. At the time of publication, Rome, which threw Cardinal Pell under the bus so fast and furiously, has nothing to say about his acquittal. The Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, however, would like to remind us that, quote, the result today does not change the Church's unwavering commitment to child safety and to a just and compassionate response to survivors and victims of child sexual abuse, unquote. Apparently, the Australian bishops are fine with the Vatican's abandonment of obviously falsely accused shepherds and would like to pretend that Pell is perhaps still a threat, much like some folks would still like to call the coronavirus the worst thing since the Black Plague. Now, the Catholic Church refused to act against credible charges of sexual abuse by priests on mostly young men, adolescent men, and some boys. The result of this was that you had a tremendous number of false accusations, just as in Britain, which shielded Sir Jimmy Savile for decades. After he died and his monstrousness was revealed, you had a spate, a veritable wave of false accusations. You can read about Operation U-Tree and the other operations in which person after, it seemed that every famous person who had died in Britain, and I suppose bachelors in particular, were accused of monstrous sexual crimes, and in almost every case, there was no evidence of this. But I guess, the guilt for having shielded Savile, well, you can see where that's going. That there must be retribution, and if we can't find guilty men, we'll find innocent ones. A piece by Erwin Kotler and Judith Abitan in the Times of Israel. Xi Jinping's China did this. There's authoritative and compelling evidence, including a study from the University of Southampton, that if interventions in China had been conducted 3 weeks earlier, transmission of COVID-19 could have been reduced by 95%. For 40 days, President Xi Jinping's CPC concealed, destroyed, falsified, and fabricated information about the rampant spread of COVID-19 through its state-sanctioned massive surveillance and suppression of data, its misrepresentation of information, its silencing and criminalizing of its dissent, and its disappearance of the whistleblowers. In late December 2019, Dr. Ai Fen, a director of the emergency department at the Central Hospital of Wuhan, the whistlegiver, disseminated information about COVID-19 to several doctors, one of whom was Dr. Li Wenling, and 8 of whom were later arrested. Dr. Ai has recently disappeared. Oh, I forgot to mention, I didn't bring this up story, that the Pope Francis, he's now campaigning for universal basic income. That we are all to become slaves. Now, you get your $1,000 a month, or whatever the equivalent is in Europe, and you don't need a job. You don't need a purpose in life. It's just your job to live a mean life, consuming beans, cheap chalupas, and the like. A finger-wagging story from The Guardian Republican who floated virus conspiracy says common sense has been my guide. And of course, the idea that the government of China would be involved in any kind of conspiracy, that's absolutely outrageous. The COVID-19 outbreak began in the Chinese city of Wuhan, but has spread globally. And by Saturday evening, it killed more people in America, nearly 20,000, than in any other country. How do we know this? Because the People's Republic of China says so. Of course, they would never lie about anything. On Saturday, Tom Cotton of Arkansas, a foreign policy hardliner, wrote on Twitter, "Since I first learned of the Wuhan coronavirus in mid-January, common sense has been my guide. Not Chinese communist lies, not the models, not so-called public health experts, just common sense. Many elected leaders have also been guided by common sense. Others haven't." Here's what we do know, Cotton said. The virus did not originate in the Wuhan animal market. Epidemiologists have demonstrated that several of the original cases did not have any contact with that food market, that the virus went into that food market before it came out of that food market. So we don't know where it originated, but we do know that we have to get to the bottom of that. We also know that just a few miles away, actually it's a few hundred meters away from that food market, is China's only biosafety level 4 super laboratory that researches human infectious diseases. We don't have evidence that this disease originated there, but because of China's duplicity and dishonesty from the beginning, we need to at least ask the question to see what the evidence says, and China right now is not giving evidence on that question at all. The Chinese ambassador to the U.S. censured Cotton following his remarks on Fox and said the senator's floating of the conspiracy theory was absolutely crazy. Isn't it funny? The media hates Russia and it hates Putin. Of course, Russia is no longer communist. China is still communist, and the media is standing like crazy for the People's Republic of China, despite their grotesque human rights abuses, up to and including the attempt to make a whole people, the Uyghurs, disappear through forced breeding. The Chinese are accusing, or that is to say, the Chinese in China are accusing America in particular and the rest of the West of xenophobia, racism, etc. Who are the real xenophobes? I saw a video over the weekend which included footage of Black people being thrown out on the streets from their apartments, of people being beaten up. They're accused that they call Americans and other foreigners viruses in China now. This is from Breitbart. African residents of Guangzhou, southern China, reportedly found themselves sleeping on the street this week as renters arbitrarily evicted them, hotels banned them, and restaurants refused to serve them food. The Africans, many businessmen, students, and others from places like Nigeria, Kenya, and Zimbabwe, say they're also being subject to arbitrary coronavirus testing and still shunned when they test negative. Many have spent years in China without leaving, unlike their Chinese neighbors, making the Communist Party's explanation that travelers from abroad require more isolation and testing to prevent imported cases of Chinese coronavirus not applicable. Yeah, they're pretty xenophobic, the Chinese, but of course we should be beating ourselves up. We let the whole world in. No, but it's the Chinese. They are our moral leaders, or so the media and many of our politicians would have us believe. Oh, here's the story. Pope Francis said in an Easter letter to members of various social movements that the crisis caused by the coronavirus could be a time to consider a universal basic income. Yes, never let a crisis go to waste. Oh, and there are other things happening in the world. Terrible, terrible things, such as the last 3 Star Wars movies not being all that successful or less successful than one would expect, and being critically reviled. Not by the critic. The critics, they don't want to say bad things about Star Wars because Star Wars is woke now. As Kathleen Kennedy, who's in charge of Skywalker, says the Force is female. And Daisy Ridley, oh dear, she has suffered. She and her eyebrows have suffered so very much. This is a story from IO9 Gizmodo by Julie Muncie, who is described as IO9 weekend editor, video game writer at other places, queer nerd girl. I have some advice for you, some life advice. Never trust a woman who calls herself a nerd. Never. And Daisy Ridley, who stars in The Rise of Skywalker. The stress from the harsh reception was pretty intense indeed. On a recent appearance on Dragcast, Ridley talked to host Nina West about the backlash to the film and shared some thoughtful considerations. It's changed film by film, honestly. She said, like 98%, it's so amazing. This last film, it was really tricky. January was not that nice. It was weird. I felt like all of this love that we've been sort of shown the first time round, I was like, where's the love gone? I watched the documentary, The Making of This Week, and it's so filled with love. And I think that it's a tricky thing when you're part of something that is so filled with love. And then people, everyone's entitled to not like something, but it feels like it's changed slightly. But I think in general, that's because social media and what have you. Making movies is, after all, a quiet affair, something you do privately and then release to a wide audience. The experience of being in a movie is wildly divergent from the experience of watching that movie as a fan. Well, thank you for pointing that out. That never would have occurred to me. Daisy says, I think in general, people share so much on social media that if I don't have social media anyway, but if I went to a film and didn't like it, I just wouldn't tweet about it. But it's such a conversation, and it always has been. I guess now conversations are just more public. So there's stuff I wouldn't have seen, but honestly, trying to scroll through my newsfeed in January and trying not to see Star Wars stuff, I'd see headlines and be like, oh my God, this is so upsetting. So it's been tricky, but then it's having that thing of I feel really proud of, and I'm so thrilled to be part of it. Yes, but it's a funny thing. All in all, the people behind the Disney Star Wars movies have had a hell of a time, especially the women and people of color who have received harassment for crimes such as existing, making a good movie and making a bad movie. There's a reason Daisy Ridley doesn't have social media after all. I guess she just has her many millions of dollars and many millions of fans. So what's the situation in Canada? Come on, page, refresh. Okay, there we go. As of today, slightly under 25,000 confirmed cases of COVID in Canada, 734 deaths. Again, Canada has 38 million people. I guess these are outdated for British Columbia, 58. And what is the, oh, yes, Quebec has 328 deaths. Ontario has 291. Why so many in Quebec as opposed to Ontario, given that Ontario has a significantly larger population? Well, it appears that old age homes are a nightmare in the province of Quebec. Okay, total now 69 COVID-19 deaths in British Columbia, population 5.1 million people. And let's see, how many on the island? 87. 87 cases of the panic disease. Vancouver Island, 2 deaths. And it's almost locked up tighter than a drum, which makes perfect sense. As of the weekend, at least 28 of the total deaths, 58 at the time, were from 2 nursing homes. 2 nursing homes in the greater Vancouver area. Okay, Canada, what's going on in Canada? Questions mount over COVID-19 outbreaks in seniors' homes and long-term care facilities. Quebec health officials are now inspecting all private long-term care facilities in the province. Canada is building its own PPP network in China, and of course they would be. Of course. Because, you wouldn't want to do that sort of thing in Canada. Nearly 6 million people have applied for COVID-19 emergency benefits. What is that? That's like a quarter of all the people of working age in Canada. Okay, a story. Nearly half of known COVID-19 deaths in Canada linked to long-term care homes, and that's from Dr. Teresa Tam, who is the Hong Kong-born Chief Medical Officer of Canada. Let's see. The federal government is urging these facilities to heed the latest national guidelines to control the spread of COVID-19 among their vulnerable residents. Well, one would think that, protocols would be stricter in these places to begin with. Of the cases where we have the data on whether someone was in a long-term care facility or seniors residence, we know that close to half of the deaths that we're tracking are linked to long-term care facilities. Again, this is a fact. Okay, this is a fact. And yet we are told that we're all at risk, regardless of our age, when clearly that is not the case. It's clearly not the case. A piece from the Globe and Mail: seniors care shouldn't be a horror show, even after a pandemic. This is from Andre Picard on August the 11th. Residents sitting in their own urine and feces because their incontinence pads had not been changed in days. Others dehydrated, starving, and disoriented, having not been fed or given their medication. 2 patients on the verge of death. That's the horror show public health inspectors found when they visited Résidence Héron, a 134-bed private long-term care facility in Dorval, Quebec, on March the 29th. Now we know that there have been at least 31 deaths. The details, first revealed by the Montreal Gazette, are sickening. The questions the situation raises are profoundly troubling. How is it possible in 2020 in Canada that elders entrusted to a licensed care home can be treated worse than dogs at the city pound? I would suggest one reason being that the people who work in these facilities as the caregivers, let's say that they have no natural affinity with their patients for a reason that I won't go into, but you can figure out. This has been hurled at me, and I've seen it directed at other people who hold restrictionist positions on immigration, that bigot, soon you're going to be in a care home and you're going to be mistreated by immigrants. What charming people they are. Oh, and the Canadian media was absolutely bemused, gobsmacked by Donald Trump's victory in 2016. They got it wrong, even worse than the American media did. And so, of course, they've been pushing the line that he's not a legitimate president. Oh, he's going to be impeached. And now the latest, this is from Lawrence Martin, who is one of the most highly respected journalists in Canada at the Globe and Mail. Forget 2016. This time, Donald Trump faces destruction. Well, the latest poll numbers that I've seen about Trump's handling of the epidemic, they've been quite good. Since the 2016 shocker, well, a shocker to you, Martin, there's always been a tendency to give Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt when talking about his re-election chances. When all his negatives are raised, knees invariably start jerking. But look what happened last time. He was counted out and still won. When it's noted that he's been trailing in the polls virtually every day in the past 3.5 years, there's the same reply. Look what happened last time. But it's finally time to forget what happened then. Chance of it happening again this time are going up in smoke. Trump is running with a collapsed economy, one of the worst handicaps an incumbent seeking re-election can have. In addition, with the United States having suffered more losses in the battle against COVID-19 than any other country, he now has a war record to run on, a record of unpreparedness, which has cost his country gravely. Of course, this is the same president who shut off travel from China on January 29th, and he was accused of being a, wait for it, racist and xenophobe. I remain convinced that if Trump had stuck to his guns, his original position on this, that we wouldn't even be talking about a COVID-19 crisis in the United States. Of course, this story is quite reminiscent of a story from The Onion going back to 2016. Increasingly nervous man says for 7th time this year that Trump is finished. Okay, I was going to talk about this last week, but I didn't think it was appropriate given that it was Holy Week. Now it is a festival, so I can talk about the utterly horrifying and disgusting 7-part Netflix series called Tiger King, Murder, Mayhem, and Madness, which I watched last week, and it is disgusting. And, we're talking about things going back to normal. Will they ever come back to normal, And you watch something like this, and there's a tendency to think, no, maybe it shouldn't go back to normal. Maybe our society is simply too depraved to be saved. Despite all this, this is a really excellent series. Now, one of the reasons why it is because it's so surprising. You're watching it and you think you know everything. You think you know the story, and then who's that guy? What's happening now? Are you kidding me? Of course, A Tiger King is about Joe Exotic, who has a whole bunch of other names, Maldonado Passage, but he was born with a German name, which he had for his youth. Schreibvogel, yes. And he is a man with a mullet and many, many earrings. And the mullet is dyed, and it looks just grotesque. And he is gay, deeply, deeply gay. And he kept big cats, tigers and the like, leopards, even lynxes, One of the things I learned from this is that chicks, perhaps not all chicks, but a lot of chicks, they dig the big cats. They dig them when they're fully grown, and they really dig them when they are kittens. I found this odd. Is it because they're exotic? Is it because there's a thrill of the taboo? Essentially, everyone in this documentary is engaged in criminal activity. So I suppose it's not really surprising that they all turn on each other, because that is the criminal life. But, a woman can get a cat, domestic feline, and cats love to play. If you show enough patience, you can get a cat to be a very amusing companion. And the cats will know when you're playing with them, and so they will retract their claws and not leave you with ugly scratches. I once taught a cat using a system described by Muriel Spark in her novel Robinson how to play ping pong. And very amusing it was too. But I don't know. It's just, too much work. I don't like the idea of keeping animals in cages. I don't even like the idea of keeping cats in apartments. Cats are meant to go outside. But we're not supposed to let them outside because, it's dangerous. Yeah, I suppose it is. They could lick up antifreeze on a garage floor. They get run over by cars. But it's not a real life for them to be stuck indoors. It simply isn't. Years ago, I had a girlfriend who I suppose you could describe her as an animal lover, and she had a lot of animals, various kinds. She had a lot of birds. Some of them in small cages, some of them in an aviary, a very big cage. Parrots and parakeets. And I remember talking to her once, and I was reading Thomas Szasz, and he was describing how Sigmund Freud had identified Leonardo da Vinci as a homosexual. And one of the reasons, this partly through a mistranslation from the Italian, and also because da Vinci used to go to the market and buy birds in cages and free them. And my girlfriend said, "Oh, I bet you thought that's really stupid, don't you?" And I thought, whoa, wow, I sure got shut down there. And as I was walking away, I thought, no, wait a minute. You're the person who likes to keep animals in cages. If it were up to me, they'd all be free. So these, the big cat conservationists, they talk about saving these animals. And for what, though? Animals, big cats like this, and this was shown in the book, the best-selling book, and the movie Born Free. It doesn't work. When these big cats are raised by people, they can never act properly as cats. And of course, the big cats, certainly tigers and lions and most forms of leopards, this isn't their environment, North America, So, and of course, they have to be kept in cages. And of course, some of the cages are bigger than others. And we know that keeping animals in cages, it typically leads to severe neurosis and strange behavior from them. So there's at the heart of this documentary series is this fight, this ferocious feud between Joe Exotic, as he calls himself, and a woman called Carol Baskin, who runs an organization called Big Cat Rescue in Tampa, Florida. Now, so we learned from the documentary, Joe Exotic did not pay his employees very much money. And they did it, well, because they loved the big cats. It turns out that Carol Baskin doesn't pay her employees at all. They're all volunteers. Overwhelmingly or almost exclusively women who love big cats. And that is an excellent scam if you can get away with it. Now, Carol Baskin tells this story of how she met her first husband. Now, the story is exceedingly dubious. But so she, and it's, you know the story. Oh, I'm in an abusive relationship, and could you save me from this abusive relationship? Anyway, she married this fellow called Don Lewis, and Don Lewis disappeared. And Carol Baskin has been accused by many people of having murdered her husband. She inherited millions of dollars from him. And there's a creepy video in the series where she's talking about the aura of money or whatever. And there's certain people have an aura, money. they do things deliberately or by accident, which causes money to come to them. Given what we know about Carol Baskin, as I say, this was deeply disturbing. So Joe Exotic runs this campaign for years against Carol Baskin, and he talks about how he'd like to put a cap in her ass. He makes statements of that frequently. He shoots dolls which have been made to look up with her. He shoots all sorts of things which are representing her. This is, of course, Joe Exotic is now in prison for 22 years for having conspired to kill Carol Baskin. You know, it's a good idea if you do not want to be charged with conspiring to kill someone, you know, not to go around telling everyone how much you'd like to kill that person, or actually, you know, making video after video showing you killing that person in a mock-up. That's really not a good idea. So Joe Exotic, you know, he was getting pretty big. He gets in a professional producer to make his videos. And that fellow, the producer, was one of the most interesting and I think believable people in the documentary. We're introduced to all of these other people. Bhagavan, or Doc Antle, and he studied guru stuff when he was young, and he is, well, his name means Lord. And he was a handsome, thin young man, and now he is a gray-haired, fat man, and he has a harem. He has a harem. Apparently, these young ladies, there's 5 or 6 of them at any one time, they want to get with him in order to be close to the big cat. Seriously, I had no idea. There's Mario Tabrau, who was a big-time coke dealer who spent years in prison, and he has his own private zoo. There's Jeff Lowe, who Joe Exotic went into business with, and I guess later double-crossed him, or so Joe Exotic thinks. And then he went into a business with another fellow who had his own private zoo in what I believe South Carolina, and that did not end up well, even though it was the South Carolinian who had apparently provided the money for this. He says one of the most amusing things in the documentary, which is, you know, I already know how to train cats. What I want to know is how to train women. Because you look at this fat guy with his long gray hair and you think, he's got a harem. How would I get a harem? I mean, what are the secrets to having a harem? One of the things that shocked me about this documentary is that Joe Exotic was frequently dressing up like a preacher. You know, the black shirt, black trousers, a Roman collar, and nobody seemed to have any problem with this, even while he's presiding over a funeral for one of his lovers, much younger gay lovers, who had killed himself, and he makes the most disgusting comments imaginable about this deceased young man in front of his mother. Apparently, Joe Exotic, he didn't like swishy men. He liked actually heterosexual men, and used drugs to entice them into a relationship with him. Meth, pot, etc. And it's all very horrifying, I must say. Again, just to wrap up, if you were the type of person who is wont to think dark thoughts about the way we live now, This might not be for you. If you are interested in a story which is very well presented, with a rather amazing cast of characters and twists and turns, then I would highly recommend Netflix's Tiger King. Final story of the day, a rather disturbing meme has come around. And yeah, how deep does the anti-white rabbit hole go? Writes Paul Kersey in VDare. Sorry for my hesitation here. It's just that my computer has gotten very, very slow and does not want to open up tabs. So there is a meme of a woman, a white mother, with her. She's blonde, blue eyes, and so she has 4 children who are also blonde and blue-eyed. And apparently, this is disgusting. This is absolutely disgusting. I mean, what is wrong with this woman that she has, 4 children? And the fact that they are white, well, that makes it even worse. I'm reminded when Mitt Romney ran for president, and it's no secret that I am not an admirer of Mitt Romney, but Mitt Romney is he's a handsome man who has a good-looking wife and had a bunch of good-looking children. And he has, isn't it disgusting, all these white children? This is really, genocidal talk. And this meme about the physical trainer with the 4 delightful young children, well, it came about the same time that we learned, you probably remember that story from the United States about polyamory, of this morbidly obese woman with her 4 lovers, 3 of whom lived with her. You all remember that, don't you? And, well, we got an update to this case. This is from National File, Lionel Duquesne, who operates the Orwell and Good Twitter feed, which I highly recommend. Polyamorous man celebrated by media, now charged with abusing infant. A man in a polyamorous relationship that consists of 3 men and 1 woman and was celebrated by the media has now been charged with abusing an infant. One of the men in the unconventional relationship, Ethan Baucom, 22, from Jacksonville, has been charged with aggravated child abuse, fracturing the 5-week-old baby's arm, leg, ribs, and skull. Thankfully, the infant will not suffer any permanent damage. Well, who could have seen that coming? Eh? Anyway, back to the 4 children. There's just one of these, not just a fur baby, but a child, which is, deeply, deeply wrong, because as much as you might love a cat, then one would with, well, an animal. But no, what is natural now is now despised. As Hungarian philosopher Michael Polanyi pointed out, liberalism is based on this inversion of values. And in that regard, story from the Daily Star that, let's see, couple fall for sex robot after designing personality and say it saved marriage. Now, this is not a story from Florida. It is from Texas. And yeah, a couple say their marriage has been saved by a sex robot. Shelley, 45, and Darius Maxey, 48, had tried to pursue polyamorous relationships in the past, but as one of them always felt like the outsider, they decided to buy a custom AI doll instead. Darius used the 5,500-pound doll's AI technology to program it to suit their personal preferences. They named her Camilla and gave her a soft Scottish accent, and to them, she's more than just a sexual partner. The couple take the robot everywhere with them and says it's made them very happy. The standards in polyamorous relationships are very low. Especially, it's rather like time sharing, that, you're not going to buy a house or an apartment you're just going to rent it for a few weeks, a year. Polyamory is much like that. So here we have a couple who they're just not up to it. Apparently, they can't even maintain those low standards with a third person, and so they have to resort to a robot. And I've mentioned this. I've talked about sex robots quite a few times on live streams in the last couple of years, because the media seems to be absolutely obsessed with this idea that finally, the millennium is almost here. We can just get rid of other people for, sexual purposes, or even for any kind of, emotional connection, because we can have robots instead. Okay, a final look at the chat. Alex Tillard says, I favor domestic production for a range of reasons, but it won't result in many blue-collar jobs. We shall see. John Miller said it's a long process, but we need to reshore manufacturing. Cheaper US dollar helps, and we also have to create the necessary infrastructure for reshoring. Yes, the whole system from beginning to end was effectively destroyed. So it is going to take some time to recreate it. Money will get you a harem, says Claire Kaw. Yeah, I suppose if you're talking about, prostitution, that would be one thing. But this big cat fellow, Doc Antle, there's no money involved. And obviously, one doubts the loyalty of anyone that you have to pay money for those kind of services, much in the same way that Machiavelli wrote that mercenaries are, you don't want mercenaries as soldiers because you cannot expect their loyalty. It is hard to follow KMG and tech, says Lecomte de Boreas. Yeah, I've never done that myself. I don't know. I suppose some people get to be good at it. Yeah, I mean, I can listen. I suppose I can write down comments, but following the chat and listening, I don't know. That's beyond my capacity. Anyway, that is the show for today. And I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific time and 7 p.m. Eastern time. If you enjoyed the show or any part of it, I would appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already. And if you would like to support this live stream, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. And I will leave you with my now traditional exit line that in this time of total atomization, I sincerely hope that all of you listening and watching manage to find some sort of human companionship. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.